Hi, I'm Ben from thePinkLens.com and welcome to this, my fourth video in the history of LGBT cinema. And in this video I'm going to be looking at LGBT cinema from the period of 1994 until 2005. For over a decade, the LGBT community had been buckling under the weight of the AIDS crisis, and this had been reflected on screen for over a decade. But in 1994, this started to change, as LGBT cinema started to go in two directions, the hard and the soft. The latter was sparked in 1994, when The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert was released, a joyous and riotous irreverent queer classic that follows three drag queens as they cross the outback in a pink bus, affectionately named Priscilla. The film was packed with sass and one-liners, catapulted Guy Pearce and Hugo Weaving to stardom, and single-handedly changed the way LGBT people would be depicted on screen.
You actually make money by dressing up like a woman?
Oh, sure. You can make a fine living in a pair of heels.
A year later, an American film that followed the exact same format followed Wesley Snipes, John Leguizamo and Patrick Swayze on a road trip across America in the movie To Wong Foo, Thanks for Everything Julie Newmar, which supposedly had developed in isolation from Priscilla, but I don't believe a word of it. And with that, the years of sadness came to an end when people realised that queer culture could be fun again. Rom-coms started to feature prominent gay characters. Four Weddings and a Funeral, My Best Friend's Wedding, The Object of My Affection, The Next Best Thing, and The Rules of Attraction all featured large gay roles, while some rom-coms were specifically made about gay people for the very first time. The Wedding Banquet, Billy's Hollywood Screen Kiss, Better Than Chocolate, The Broken Hearts Club, Kissing Jessica Stein, and even Eating Out saw the love lives of LGBT people being given the big screen treatment. The Birdcage saw Robin Williams and Nathan Lane recreate French classic La Cage aux Folles for an American audience, while But I'm a Cheerleader hilariously spoofed the gay conversion camps that had sprung up across America. Meanwhile, comedies were made that heavily depicted LGBT characters or themes, such as Mrs. Doubtfire, In and Out, Happy Texas, and, unfortunately, Boat Trip, which spends so much time mocking people that when it finally gets around to being tolerant, the damage is already done.
You want to get back together?
Well, I did, before I found out that you were,
How could you think I'm gay?
During this period, queer stories would also make their small screen debut too, with Tales of the City, Will and Grace, The L Word, and both the UK and American versions of Queer as Folk making waves on television for the first time. While the UK would go gaga for Kinky Boots on the big screen in 2005, a real queer breakthrough was for director John Cameron Mitchell with his off-Broadway musical Hedwig and the Angry Inch, which was adapted for the screen in 2000 and would see the writer and director turn actor and star in the big screen version of his play.
Ladies and gentlemen, whether you like it or not.
Ow!
Hedwig!
Following a universally ignored songwriter whose attempt to have gender reassignment surgery to escape communist East Germany was botched, but allowed her to come to the US and start to teach a young singer his craft, this rock musical has become an enduring cult hit. Mitchell would go on to become one of the biggest LGBT directors, and during this period, other queer filmmakers would rise to prominence.
When it comes to huge openings, a lot of people think of me.
After rising to prominence with Mala Noche in 1986, American auteur Gus Van Sant was catapulted to stardom thanks to his queer reimagining of Shakespeare's history plays My Own Private Idaho. He would then go on to direct several big mainstream hits before returning to queer cinema in 2008 with his biopic of landmark gay politician Harvey Milk. The rise of American independent cinema in the early 90s saw the rise of the new queer cinema movement, the harder side of LGBT movies. Essentially allowing a film to have no clear genre, it incorporated films such as Chasing Amy, Head On, and Trick. And from this movement emerged director Gregg Araki, a director whose movies are characterised by their distinct sensual assaults, from the gay road heist The Living End to the dysfunctional sexually diverse ensemble of Totally Fucked Up, and psychedelic sci-fi horror Nowhere to sex work drama Mysterious Skin. At the same time, punk subculture queercore was developing too. The movement harshly critiqued society and LGBT people's place within it, and from this cultural movement, Bruce LaBruce would rise to the fore. blending explicit pornography with a more traditional narrative in movies like Hustler White and The Raspberry Reich. He unabashedly tackles taboo topics such as fetish, rape, prostitution and violence, often in quite disturbing ways. Where films about LGBT people had previously been fairly few and far between, suddenly there was a massive explosion in queer cinema. With too many to list, some of the highlights of this independent cinema explosion included lesbian movies like Go Fish, Bound, High Art, German movie Amy and Jaguar, and British My Summer of Love, which featured an impressive debut from Emily Blunt.
Apparently I'm a bad influence on people.
And David Lynch's Mulholland Drive, the trippy neo-noir mystery that revolves around the lesbian couple and is frequently cited now as one of the greatest movies of the 21st century.
Where's this going?
Mulholland Drive. It's been a very strange day.
Getting stranger.
Films that featured trans characters included Flawless, Before Night Falls, Breakfast on Pluto, and Spanish musical 20 Centimeters. Meanwhile, there were so many gay romance movies that in 2006, comedy movie Another Gay Movie would spoof what had decidedly become its own genre of cinema. Notable films of this period include Edge of 17, Get Real, Big Eden, Latter Days, and British tour de force Beautiful Thing, which depicted a teenage romance between two young men on a council estate.
Push him around in a little frilliette. A big blue pram called Queen of the Road.
I think I'll have 2 of you and 10 of your mate. Hello.
Elsewhere in the world, many other countries were producing similar films too. Hong Kong movie Happy Together is cited as one of the most influential films of its period, while French Beau Travail, Close to Leo, and Mexican Y Tu Mama Tambien were big critical hits. But where many English language films were decidedly negative in tone in the way that they were depicting LGBT people, world cinema was a little bit more positive. Nowhere is this more evident than in the work of Spanish master director Pedro Almodovar. After his first movie, Law of Desire, saw him collaborate with Antonio Banderas for the first of 6 movie collaborations together, movies like Talk to Her and Bad Education all featured prominent gay storylines, while All About My Mother is probably the most acclaimed and enduring LGBT movie to be made in Spanish, and saw him collaborate in one of 5 movies with Penelope Cruz. Almodovar's movies saw him win 2 Oscars in the early noughties, and this wasn't the only time that the Academy Awards ventured toward rewarding LGBT movies or LGBT stories. Gods and Monsters, the story of gay horror director James Whale, was nominated for 3 Oscars, winning 1 of them. Hilary Swank won an Oscar in 1999 for her depiction of trans man Brandon Teena in Boys Don't Cry, while Charlize Theron also won for her depiction of lesbian serial killer Aileen Wuornos in Monster. Philip Seymour Hoffman would also win for his performance as the titular role in Capote, while The Hours and Far From Heaven received multiple nominations, and both feature lesbian and gay storylines respectively. But in all these films, LGBT characters were subjected to a whole host of negative and tragic circumstances. Similarly, gay history movies like Holocaust film Bent and biopic Wild saw the extremes of homophobia on film. For a while, it seemed like Hollywood didn't mind seeing the stories of LGBT people, as long as they suffered. But then, in 2005, 2 films arrived to buck that trend. Transamerica saw Felicity Huffman nominated for Best Actress as a trans woman who reconnects with her son in a road trip across America. But in the same year, the now iconic Brokeback Mountain was released. Made by Taiwanese director Ang Lee, the film is an adaptation of a short story by Annie Proulx and follows the love story between 2 sheep farmers who fall in love while isolated in the mountains together. While still tragic in its social exploration of gay men, what made it such a landmark film was that it unabashedly depicted 2 masculine men who fell desperately in love with each other. Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger's performances were widely acclaimed, and the film seemed poised to win the Best Picture prize, having swept all the precursors beforehand. But then, on the night, it wasn't meant to be. Ensemble race drama Crash scooped the prize, much to the horror of audiences and critics alike. And while the rest of the world had been ready to take the gay cowboy movie to its heart, the Hollywood elite was not. And that brings us to the end of this period of LGBT cinema, with queer films beginning to make waves at the Oscars, LGBT cinema becoming a genre in its own right, and both softcore and hardcore depictions of queer people beginning to provoke and acclimatise people to LGBT people on screen. This was a period of marked difference from the decade before. But in the years after, just as changes in the law began to assimilate LGBT people more with mainstream society, so too did LGBT cinema, with more assimilation with the coming of age of a whole generation of millennials. Be sure to tune in next time when I'll be looking at films from 2005 right through to the present day in my final video. Also, make sure you check out www.thepinklens.com for all your news, reviews and features about the best in LGBT cinema in the UK. Until next time, folks.